wail because of him. Even so, amen. Revelations. And then, but there is also another prophecy, which is kind of a countervailing prophecy, right? Remember therefore how thou hast received in heart, and hold fast and repent. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. So if he's coming on the clouds, everyone's going to know. But if he comes as a thief, so there's a dual prophecy here. One symbolic, one tend to be literal. So which was it? Which is it? So every eye shall see him, or only those who are watching for him? Okay? So it is predicted that he will suffer and be rejected because many will expect the Lord to come on the literal clouds. You know, we study in the principle that when Jesus came in the book of Isaiah, right, there's the two prophecies of Jesus being the Lord of glory and the Lord of suffering. So how could he be both? Well, we extrapolate that he could have been the Lord of glory had the people of the time accepted him as opposed to rejecting him. And if the rejection took place, he becomes the Lord of suffering. So two prophecies again. Okay, so the prophecy of the second advent. We know the prophecies, we just outlined them about on the clouds, on the earth. But the biblical reality of Elijah's coming and Jesus' first coming, the people expected Elijah to come. But as Jesus said, John the Baptist was Elijah, came in the spirit and power of Elijah. So that confused people. People were waiting for Elijah to come back in a chariot of fire because that's how biblical legend says he left, right? But the Messiah, Jesus, came, not on the clouds, but born of a woman. Jesus came. And then in the second advent, there is this expectation by many Christians that there'll be the great rapture, we'll all be lifted up, right? And so there's this dichotomy between the clouds and the flesh, as it says here. There's these double prophecies. And in the book of Genesis and Revelation, the bookends of the Bible, right, it talks about the tree of life, that the desire fulfilled is the tree of life, that had humankind, Adam and Eve, fulfilled the three blessings, then they would have they've attained the tree of life. The tree of life is representative of the fulfilled perfect person, what we call in divine principle, an individual truth body who's one with God, in direct dominion with God in the third blessing. And I always think of this word individual, like the etymology of the word individual. An individual is an undivided duality, individual, right? So when your mind and body are united, you're an individual. But if your mind and body is separated, then maybe you're just a individual, you know? You're a divided person. An individual is someone whose mind and body is united, centered on God. So in Revelations chapter 22:14, it says, "Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and they may enter the city by the gates." So the tree of life means the perfected Adam. Jesus came in the position of, in Corinthians it calls him the last Adam. But again, the inference is that there was the first Adam position, and that because of the fall, Adam didn't fulfill, and the manifestation of the three blessings didn't take place. So when Jesus came, that was the time where the four-position foundation could finally be realized, hopefully. So, in light of the principle, here we see that Adam was spirit and flesh, mind and body. And if he could have brought his mind and body together in the first blessing, there would have been an accomplishment of the tree of life. But because of the fall, Jesus had to come, right? To bring salvation, which is restoration, to bring the spirit and flesh. But Jesus' body, the flesh, was taken by Satan. Jesus was, quote, the ransom for our ability to receive God's grace and be saved. So in the Christian viewpoint, Jesus was the ransom that Satan claimed. So the flesh was taken. At the time of the second advent, the spirit and the flesh must be restored. This is God's hope. This is God's desire. This is the manifestation of the third blessing. So how will he come? In Revelations 12:5 gives us a clue here. "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 7 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. I read this to my daughter last night. She said, Dad, what was the dragon? What was the red dragon? Interesting point. Think about this time we're living in. If in fact we're living in the last days, what do we associate with redness? Anyone?
Red China?
Oh, international communism, the Red Menace, right? So what was communism? It was a godless ideology that was permeating the earth in the 20th century, ready to devour all religious things, including he who was to come. So the red dragon, we can hypothesize or extrapolate that the red dragon was representative of international communism. Okay, so now, I'm going to go through 4,000 years of history in about 10 minutes. Bear with me. Okay, most of you are familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, this was the part of the lecture that really got me to thinking about this movement and who Sun Myung Moon was. It really got me thinking. Because at the time of Israel, the beginning of Israel, centered on Abraham, we know Abraham was the father of the 3 monolithic faiths, right? And Jacob's family, 12 sons, 12 tribes, 70 family members, were the foundation on which the Israelite nation was to be built in preparation for the coming of the Lord. Okay? And it was interesting. We heard the story of how Abraham had to offer Isaac on the altar, right? And he was supposed to kill Isaac on the altar. But the angel came and said, you don't have to kill your son. Because God didn't really want Isaac to be killed. He just wanted Abraham's heart to be purified. God needed Isaac to carry out the lineage. If there was no Isaac, there'd be no Jacob or Esau. Think about that. So God really didn't want to kill Isaac. But it was that family that became the foundational family for the tribe of what was to be Israel, the Hebrew nation, that was going to accept Jesus when he came. But their first 400 years was the time of slavery in Egypt under the pharaohs, right? And then we see eventually they made it to Canaan. The period of the judges were the religious leaders of the time, and they actually set up a religious-based society. And that led to the period of the kings, Saul, David, and Samuel, correct? But eventually, because of certain corruptions, the United Kingdom divided between North and South, Israel and Judah. But then there was a return, and an exile and a return. Israel came back together. And then Malachi appeared 400 years before Jesus appeared. And we said before, Malachi was the last prophet, and is the last book of the Old Testament. And the Christians at the time, there was a prophecy. They were believing that Malachi would come at the time of Jesus to proclaim and announce that the Messiah was here. I looked up Malachi. The name Malachi is from, it means the deliverer, or the messenger of God, actually. So he was a messenger, and in Hebrew theology, they give great credence to his, at the time, they give great credence to his message about John the Baptist coming again. Or him coming again. But he didn't come, John the Baptist came, and this confused a lot of people. What happened then, Jesus, because of the faithlessness of other people, was persecuted, crucified, and then resurrected. And the victory, of course, is the resurrection of Jesus. And I don't know, some of you may have read the speech that Reverend Moon gave about the Pacific Rim era in 2007, 2008, around the time of his 88th birthday. In that speech, he says that God's pain of losing Jesus was greater than his pain of losing Adam and Eve. I thought that was very sobering to me when I heard that. Because why? For 2,000 years, the Israelite people were prepared as a nation to receive the Messiah. And the Messiah came and they didn't believe. So, did God give up? And this is the key point here. No, God didn't give up. Because then we see now in the 2,000 years since Jesus being on the earth, some interesting parallels. And we can debate actually the time frames a little bit, but it's not debatable about the sequence of events. This is recorded history. This is immutable fact. Hey, who said religion is mythology? This is history. That the first 400 years centered on Jesus, 12 apostles, and 70 disciples, which was akin to the 12 sons and 12 tribes, started the new foundation for Christianity, right? But like the Jews, the Hebrews in Egypt, the Christians endured incredible persecution, right? At the hands of the Roman Empire. You know, the catacombs and, you know, the being fed to the lions, all that nonsense. And the rumors, the Christians were thought to be cannibals. You know why? Because they ate the body and the blood. There was a myth out there that the body and blood, they were actually partaking, eating each other, and they were cannibals. They had to gotta get rid of those Christians. But something miraculous happened. In 313 AD, Constantine issued what was called the Edict of Milan, which said that all religions in the Roman Empire must be tolerated or understood. That tolerance for all religions was now the law of the land. And by 392 or so, I think it was 392 or 396, Christianity became the state religion of Rome. So, there you go. And that led to the point of Constantine and the church patriarchs, who were the new religious leaders, and the united Christian empire centered on Charlemagne's victories. But then, just as in the Old Testament, there was corruption and division. There was the divided kingdom and papal exile. There were actually two papacies at this time, one in Avignon, France, and one in Italy. Like, things were really messed up. And no one knew who to believe. But again, it was because of corruption. But finally, there was a papal return, and then in 1517, this guy Martin Luther showed up and began or initiated the what we'd call today the Protestant Reformation. Was a reform movement against the corruption in the Roman Catholic Church. And again, this is 1517. Then if we extrapolate 400 years from 1517, takes us to 1917 or thereabouts, right? Which kind of gives us an indication that we are, in fact, living in a very interesting time period. If history is true and biblical record shows that these parallels not only exist linearly, but that there was a restoration course taking place. Because of the failures of certain things leading up to Jesus, the course had to repeat. So, and the very same sequence of events took place over roughly the same time period and the same, you know, increments of time. When I saw this in 1974, I said, oh boy, my life has to change. But the thing is, I didn't want to change. I was kind of happy being a student and a musician and all this stuff, and, you know, but this really shook me to my boots, I have to say. And it really changed my perspective about Jesus and God. And actually, at the time, I knew nothing about Sun Myung Moon. Had no idea who this guy was. I just saw this face on these buttons of this German girl, you know. But then I began to pray and try to understand what was going on. And my prayer was, is he really the guy? Or is he maybe the one that we're waiting for? So it says in the Bible, the Son of Man comes from the east, for as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So Reverend Moon is from Asia. That's pretty far east of here. So again, there's a bit of extrapolation we can make. My prayer at the time, I thought, was pretty sincere. And I think to the degree that our prayers are sincere is the degree to which we get answers. And gradually, I started finding answers. And as a music student at that time, and I'll just share this final bit here, I was kind of caught up in Western art music that was really abstract and avant-garde, and I really thought this was the new wave, you know, and abstraction, abstract expressionism. But then I had a certain realization that if there was going to be a musical Messiah, it wasn't going to be someone who's going to go farther out into the abyss of freedom and licentiousness, but it was someone who's going to go back and re-examine the past traditions of music and tonality and polyphony, the great music of the Christian tradition. That was my little epiphany. And then when I read about the principle of restoration, how restoration means going back and reclaiming what had been lost and then bringing it back to its original intent, I realized, even for me as a musician, this had relevance. So I began to change my whole perspective about music and art in general, and the paradigm of truth, beauty, and goodness. We were discussing that before. The importance of those three aspects that are explained in chapter 1 of the Divine Principle. And that as an artist, that it was important for me to use my ability with a certain sense of moral responsibility to my family, to my church, to my community, to the other musicians I come in contact with. And I think most of us today would agree that a lot of the popular culture that Richard alluded to, right? All the sexually explicit stuff that goes on is a sign that we've kind of lost our way, that in this desire to be progressive, we've actually spiritually become regressive. And real progressive means going back, in a sense, and finding that on which God and the principles on which God and the universe are predicated.
This is, just a flyer that we made. Now we're using this flyer all over the country now. Wherever we have an event, we use the Freedom Society image, and this is it. This is our brand for the Freedom Society. We use this on our banners, we use this in our flyers, and it's very effective. We have a program that's the same wherever we go. We lead with our local people, and then we have a Freedom Society presentation by somebody locally or somebody nationally, but we have that presentation. After that, then we bring in politicians, and we did this in Chicago. The first time we held the event, we had the elections commissioner for the whole state of Illinois come in and speak about what he did to get people out to vote. And then we had 2 state legislators talk about how you can support a political candidate. And then they said, and of course they said, and this is how you can support me. And, but they were very happy to be there. Politicians like showing up at these events, by the way. And so that was quite effective. And we actually had Pat Hickey there that day, and Pat was an elected member from the Unification Church in the state of Nevada. And he was able to tell us how he was inspired by Reverend Moon to get involved in politics, to run for office, and now he's Speaker of their legislature out in the state of Nevada. A very powerful person. But he was inspired by Reverend Moon to get involved in politics 20 years ago. Then we have our speakers come in. And these speakers that come in, some of them are local speakers, some of them come in via Skype. And I want to get up to some of those people. Here's Lourdes. Okay, here's Bill Gertz. Now Bill Gertz has been at every one of our programs so far, and he speaks on national defense and he speaks on the Second Amendment. And he is powerful. He is well researched. When you hear him speak, you get educated. You get educated on national defense, national security, the Second Amendment, you get all the history of it, and you come out of there and you think, well, I learned something. Now, do you think that sets up a good discussion afterwards? You better believe it does. It really has impact because of it. Dan Pfefferman, he's another one of our speakers that comes in on religious freedom issues. And in America, we have got to fight for religious freedom in this country. And I'll tell you, we experienced this directly with the State Department when we had the Universal Periodic Review of Japan come up recently. We had petitioned the State Department, the U.S. Embassy. We had all of our ducks in a row so that our religious freedom issue in Japan would be brought forward by the State Department. Do you think the State Department said one word about religious freedom in the Universal Periodic Review of Japan? No. All they spoke about was what's going on with gay rights in Japan. What's going on with women's rights? Not one word about religion. And I'm sure that is with every nation in the world. We have the wrong people in office right now. And that's why religion is not being discussed at all. It's all these other rights that people care about. But Dan does a good job on speaking about that. Now you see Richard Panzer there. Now he was live in New Jersey, but usually when Richard comes in, he comes in as a Skype speaker. And it works. It really works. He comes across very good. We use his slide presentation, and he just saying, next slide, and then, but he's saying what you heard today. You know, something similar. He's giving that kind of presentation, but do you think that sets up a good discussion? Okay, remember, we are setting the framework for the discussions. We are setting the framework for the political issues. We are educating the people that we bring to these meetings. That's what we're doing with the Freedom Society. They got the philosophy, but then they got deeper education on issues that we think are important. Now, another speaker that we had was Dr. Ann Iparigaray. Now, she was a hit. She was a huge hit when she spoke in New Jersey, but also when she spoke in Minnesota via Skype. She had big impact. Why? Because she has extensive experience in education. And she brought that to bear. And then she has her opinions. And her opinions are very clear. But they are political opinions. And they would move people possibly to vote in a different way than they're voting right now, just because of education. How many people are concerned about the education of their children? Who's educating them about what we need to have in our political officials for what direction our political officials should be taking in education? And to tell voters that if your elected officials aren't standing for what you believe, then maybe you should get them out of office and get somebody else in that stands for what you stand for. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, that's why the Freedom Society meetings are so important. We're doing voter education. And there's a huge Hispanic audience out there. These people, they probably believe in one man and woman marriage. They probably don't believe in homosexuality for their children. They probably have all kinds of moral issues with the Democratic Party, but nobody is educating. We should be doing that education. Okay, here we see Admiral Lunny. Man, was he good when he came in? We can have some of our good proponents for our movement come in and speak. And Admiral Lunny, he gave a great testimony about True Father when he was there. Does that make a difference? It makes a huge difference in our work. And that's all Freedom Society work. This is Minneapolis. Now, again, Dr. Anderson was at that meeting, Gordon Anderson. Now, this guy has written books about the Constitution. He speaks about the pursuit of happiness. He speaks about issues that really make people think about what are we really working for? What are we really standing for in America? And Gordon Anderson does a good job. He really does. Senator Boitano from New Mexico, he's been another one of our speakers on business and business regulations. Now, do we see a lot of businesses leaving America and going to other countries to do business because of taxes and regulations, over-regulations in this country? Does that mean American jobs are leaving America? Is that because of the companies, or is it because the government is driving them out of the country? But why are we putting elected officials in office that would drive American businesses out of our country? Does that even make sense? Now, Senator Boitano, when he comes in, he educates the people that we bring in the room as to why we should be voting for the right kind of people. Keith McCarthy, he was at our meeting in Los Angeles, another great expert on getting involved in politics. He was a mayor of Downey, California. He spoke about how he got involved in politics, how he got elected to office, and how you and I can make a difference. He can speak to our second generation, our second generation, about getting involved in politics right now and how they can make a difference. You know, this is something very important that we should be bringing second generation, our youth, our young adults to these meetings and getting them educated. The other thing I want to speak about, that the Freedom Society has really made as one of its hallmarks is the World Cafes. Just like we have the World Cafe that we did here today, we're doing the same thing in the Freedom Society, but it's all on these political issues. And it really gets people thinking, and it gets people thinking because their peers, the people around the table are speaking about these issues and motivating people to maybe think a little bit differently than they've thought before about important issues of the time that we live in. It's so important to have these Freedom Society meetings. Now, I just want to conclude with this. What's our goal with the Freedom Society? Number one, we want to do voter education. We do that with Cook-Chenim's presentation to begin with. We give it a framework. But then, secondly, we do voter education.